The Alphas came to retrieve their cub's lifeless body. But they discovered what humanity truly is. The proximity alarm did not ease me into the morning. It detonated. One sharp, merciless shriek that knocked my coffee mug off the edge of the desk and sent it spinning across the floor of the monitoring station while I was still blinking sleep out of my eyes. I had been awake for 19 hours before I finally allowed myself 4 hours of rest on the cot in the corner. I do not recommend that kind of sleep. It does not refresh you. It just suspends you between exhaustion and function, like something floating in a jar. I am Dr. Yaro Konkwo. I am the Chief Xenomedical Officer of Outpost Kepler 9, which is a polite way of saying, I am the only doctor within 6 light years who is willing to work this far out on the outer rim, with a staff of 11 people, 2 functioning surgical suites, 1 outdated medical scanner that gives a high-pitched whine whenever it is pushed past its limits, and absolutely no reinforcements within reasonable hailing distance. I have been stationed here for 4 years. I chose this posting. I am aware that this says something unflattering about my judgment, but every time I have considered requesting a transfer, something has happened on Kepler 9 that reminded me why I came here in the first place. The outer rim is where the work is difficult and the equipment is old and the solutions are improvised and there is nobody watching over your shoulder to check whether you are following protocol. I have always done my best work when nobody is watching over my shoulder. The outpost itself is not impressive from the outside. It is a collection of connected modules arranged on a flat pale plateau, surrounded by the wide, quiet landscape that Kepler 9 offers in every direction. Low rock formations, pale ground, a sky that is always one shade too deep a blue to feel entirely comfortable. We have a medical wing, a research station, a communications hub, a kitchen and common room, 12 personal quarters, and 1 monitoring station that I spend far too much of my time in. We have a small transport bay for the 2 ground vehicles that get us to and from survey points. We do not have a landing bay large enough to be strategically significant, which I have always privately considered a feature rather than a shortcoming. Strategically insignificant facilities do not usually find themselves in the path of events that require strategic responses. I had been wrong about that, as it turned out. When I reached the monitoring station and pulled up the long-range display, I felt the coffee I had not yet had register as a sharp cold absence. There were 12 ships above us. 12. Arranged in a formation that I recognized immediately, because you do not work the outer rim for 4 years without learning the silhouettes of every major fleet power in the galaxy, and you especially learn the ones that could end your outpost the way a boot ends a small problem on a kitchen floor. Cathara dreadnoughts. 12 of them, sitting above Kepler 9 in a silent arc that occupied more of the visual field on my long-range display than I was entirely comfortable with. The Cathara are not the kind of species that gets described in calm, neutral language. Every xenobiology briefing I have ever read about them uses words like apex, dominant, and supreme with the kind of reverence that usually gets reserved for geological forces. They stand between 7 and 9 feet tall, depending on caste. They have 4 hearts, a skeletal structure dense enough to survive impacts that would reduce a human to a complicated stain, and a social hierarchy so ancient and rigid that entire civilizations have reshaped themselves simply to avoid being classified in an unfavorable position within it. Their claws are retractable and functional, not decorative. Their battle crest, the ridge of dense, responsive cartilage that runs along the top of their skull from brow to the base of the neck, serves as one of their primary communication systems, capable of expressing authority, threat, grief, and a dozen other states that the xenobiology files have cataloged with clinical precision, and that I have come to understand in a more practical way than I ever expected. Their cubs, their young, are sacred in a way that goes beyond culture, beyond law. They're the future of the pack, of the bloodline, of everything the Cathara consider worth protecting. Cathara society is built around the pack as the fundamental unit of existence, and within the pack the cub occupies the role of what every pack is ultimately for. To lose a cub is not simply a tragedy. It is a wound in the structural sense, something that affects the function of the whole. To harm a cub deliberately is to invite a response that the galaxy does not have a word for beyond total, and that tends to resolve the kind of disputes it creates very permanently and very thoroughly. 12 of their dreadnoughts were sitting above my outpost in silence. Not weapons hot. I checked the reading twice because that detail mattered enormously, and I wanted to be certain. The weapons were not at active charge. The shields were present, but not in combat configuration. They had come here with purpose, but not with the particular purpose of immediate destruction. And that gap between those two things was the gap I had to work with. My colleague Oliver Drum appeared in the doorway behind me. He is tall and quiet and has been my lead trauma nurse for 3 of my 4 years on Kepler 9. He is the person I trust most in a crisis, partly because of his skill, and partly because his face does not change in ways that alarm patients or colleagues regardless of what is happening around him. He had 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one without a word, which is the correct response to 12 dreadnoughts, and is also the correct response to most things, in my experience. He looked at the display. He looked at me, he drank his coffee. Cathara, he said, it was not a question. 12, I said. Active weapons? No. He nodded slowly. Processing this. Then they want something. The comm channel opened before I could respond. The sound that came through was the particular resonant tone of a Cathara communication system, which is designed for larger vocal anatomy than human audio equipment was built to handle comfortably. And the voice that followed it was deep and carried the kind of authority that made the air in the monitoring station feel different. Heavier, slower, more deliberate. It spoke in galactic standard, which every species uses when they want to be clearly understood, and which the Cathara specifically use when they want you to understand that they are choosing to be understood. When the Cathara decide to speak your language, they are doing you a courtesy. The courtesy does not make the message kind. Human facility. This is Fleet Mother Keth Sora of the 7th Pack Sovereign. You are in possession of remains belonging to Cub Rokan, blood of the 7th Pack. We have come to retrieve what is ours. You will prepare the remains for transfer, and you will do so without delay. Humans are known for their curiosity regarding alien biology. We are aware of your species' tendencies. Whatever condition the body is in, we will receive it. We ask only that you do not make this difficult. I set my coffee cup down on the desk very carefully. 12 dreadnoughts. A Fleet Mother, which is the highest command rank in the Cathara military hierarchy. And a message that carried inside it, like a stone inside a piece of fruit, a grief so large and so compressed that it had become something else entirely. It had become authority. It had become the kind of voice that does not expect to be contradicted, because it has not had cause to expect that in a very long time. They had been mourning. That was in the voice, underneath the command and the precision and the controlled flatness of galactic standard. 31 days of mourning, sealed in deep space observance, the kind of grief the Cathara practice that closes communications and turns inward and holds the loss with the full weight of the pack. And now they had emerged from that mourning to collect what remained. And they had expected to find a body. And they had expected to find it with whatever indignities a minor species might have visited upon it. And they had come anyway. Because a Fleet Mother does not leave her cubs' remains in alien hands regardless of what condition those remains are in. Oliver was looking at me. The others on the outpost were awake now. The proximity alarm had reached every corner of the facility, and I could hear movement in the corridor behind the monitoring station, careful and quiet and waiting. I stood in my monitoring station in the clothes I had slept in, with 11 people behind me who were all looking to me for a response to 12 Keth, Era dreadnoughts, and I looked at the display for one long moment that contained everything I knew about the 31 days that had led to this. Morning. Fleet Mother, I said into the open channel, and I worked very hard to make my voice sound like someone who found this situation routine. I appreciate your patience in reaching out directly. I want to have a conversation with you before we proceed. I think that would serve everyone well. I would like to invite you to come inside. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has texture. It stretched for 6 full seconds. I counted them. On a ship that carries a Fleet Mother of the 7th Pack Sovereign, I imagine those 6 seconds involved several rapid assessments and at least one guard reaching for something they did not ultimately deploy. You are inviting us inside, she said. She did not make it a question. She made it a statement that she was turning over very slowly to look at from every angle. I am, I said. I think what I have to show you is better understood in person than over a comm channel. I give you my word, for whatever a human word is worth to you, that I am not attempting to complicate this situation. I am a doctor. I do not have weapons. I have a medical facility and a story I think you should hear before we discuss any kind of transfer. Another silence. 5 seconds this time. We will come inside, she said. But understand this clearly, Dr. Okonkwo. If this is a manipulation of any kind, there will be no conversation after. There will only be consequences. Understood completely, I said. I think you should prepare yourself, Fleet Mother. Not for something threatening. For something that does not fit any category you currently have available. The channel went quiet. I turned to Oliver, who was looking at me with the expression he uses when he cannot yet determine which side of a significant decision I have just landed on. Get the others, I said. Tell them Fleet Mother Keth Sora of the 7th Pack Sovereign is coming through the main bay entrance. Tell them to look composed. Are we composed? Oliver asked. I picked up my coffee and drank the last of it. It was cold. I did not care. We are always composed, I said. That is the job. He went. I stayed at the display for one more moment and looked at the 12 ships above us. Quiet and patient, and waiting for something they had not yet realized they were going to receive. And I thought about a young man with amber eyes and a soft-edged battle crest, sitting up in a pale blue blanket, looking at a hand-drawn star map on the wall of a room he had nearly died in and had instead left alive. The morning was going to be a significant one. I had been in significant mornings before. The quality I had found they all shared was that they arrived without asking whether you were ready. And the only thing to do was to be ready anyway. I went to the main bay to meet the fleet mother of the 7th Pack Sovereign, and I carried with me the knowledge of 31 days that I was about to spend the next few hours, explaining in the most careful and most honest language I had available. There is a particular quality to silence after a crash. It is not like ordinary quiet. It is heavier, and it has texture, and it presses against you from every direction, and carries inside it the question that nobody wants to ask out loud, which is, did anything survive that? 31 days before the fleet arrived, our Eastern sensor array picked up an object entering the atmosphere at the wrong angle and the wrong speed. Wrong for a controlled descent, right for a catastrophe. I was in Surgical Suite 1 reviewing the results of a minor procedure I had performed that morning on Elon. A member of our maintenance crew who had managed to embed a piece of survey equipment in his left forearm in a manner that he could not adequately explain and that I chose not to press him on. Oliver knocked twice on the suite door and opened it without waiting, which he only ever does when something has moved past the level of routine concern into the level of actual emergency. Crash impact. Eastern lowlands, he said, 6 kilometers out. The sensor signature before entry read consistent with an escape pod. It is not a human standard escape pod. I stripped my gloves. What is the configuration? Size and hull composition are consistent with Cathara personal emergency vessels, he said, which means whatever was inside is large, and if it survived, it is in an unknown environment surrounded by an unknown species, and it is almost certainly trained from the time it could walk to treat an unknown species as a potential threat until proven otherwise. I looked at him. I thought about what we had in the crash kit. I thought about what I knew about Cathara biology, which at that point was theoretical. Data in a file, not experience in a room. Get the crash kit, I said. Get Nadia and Pete. Tell them visible tools, low hands, no sudden movements. We go slow and we go calm, and if it is already gone when we get there, we document it with full respect and we bring it back properly. By gone I did not mean departed. We both knew that. The ground transport east takes 12 minutes on the standard path. Oliver pushed it to 9. The landscape of Kepler 9 scrolled past us in the pale blue light of mid-morning, wide and flat and quiet, the kind of terrain that does not offer shelter or drama, and seems slightly indifferent to whoever is crossing it. Nadia sat in the rear seat checking the crash kit against its inventory list for the second time, which is her habit when she is managing concern and converting it into useful activity. Pete sat beside her looking out the window with the particular focused stillness of someone who is preparing for something they do not yet have full information about. Pete has been my junior medic for 2 years. He is 26, careful and thorough, and he apologizes when he walks into a room too loudly, which tells you something about the quality of his consideration for the people around him. I have come to value that quality enormously in the kind of work we do, where the person in front of you is frequently frightened and in pain and does not need the additional burden of a caregiver who is careless with the space around them. The pod had come down in the shallow depression between the 2 rock formations that mark the Eastern Survey boundary. It had not come down gently. The furrow it had carved through the pale ground stretched back nearly 50 meters before it reached the crumpled, steam-releasing remains of the vessel itself, a dark, dense shape that had been a precision-engineered escape capsule before it met Kepler 9's atmosphere at the wrong angle and had subsequently become something considerably less precise. The hatch had blown open on impact. Emergency protocols on most Cathara vessels will force the hatch if the internal pressure shifts past a certain threshold, so the open hatch was not necessarily evidence of survival. It was evidence of a system doing what it was designed to do when the conditions were extreme. The hand was the second thing I saw. It was reaching out through the open hatch toward the pale ground, large and still, clawed at the tips in the way Cathara hands are. The claws retracted in rest position, which told me something even then, because a conscious and threatened Cathara would have the claws out. The color was deep stone gray, warm underneath despite the cold and the crash, and it was not moving. We stopped the transport 10 meters back and approached on foot, the way you approach anything that might still have a pulse. Carefully, fully present, with all of your attention on the question of what is needed. He was inside. He had been thrown against the interior rear bulkhead on impact and had slid toward the hatch, and the hand I had seen was the last thing his body had managed before consciousness stopped cooperating. He was large. In the cramped interior of the escape pod, he looked enormous. The way large things always look larger when they are in spaces too small for them. His frame folded at angles that it was not designed for, head dropped forward, battle crest lying flat against the skull in the full settled position that the xenobiology files describe as severe physiological distress. I pressed the scanner to his chest. I listened to what it told me. The Cathara have 4 hearts, offset in their rhythm from each other, so that the resulting pulse is layered and complex, and bears no resemblance to a human heartbeat. Under normal function, the scanner should have registered 4 distinct impulses in their rolling sequence. It registered 1, faint, irregular, losing consistency with every cycle. The other 3 were silent. Nadia read the display over my shoulder. Her voice when she spoke was the voice she uses in serious situations, which is quieter than her normal voice and more precise and carries no extra weight that might make the moment heavier than it needs to be. What do we do? I looked at him. I did what doctors do in the first moment of a case like this, which is to put aside every prior calculation and look at the actual person in front of you. He was young. I could read youth in the lines of his face even without the xenobiology data to confirm it. The battle crest was still developing its final edges, still soft where it would eventually harden into the dense ridge of a full adult. His hands, even their stillness, had the slightly unfinished quality of hands, and that were not yet entirely what they were going to be. He was 17 years old. I would not know that specific number until later, but I knew young the way any doctor knows young, and I knew alone, and I knew frightened, and I knew that the 3 silent hearts were telling me something I was not prepared to accept without an argument. We take him inside, I said. We do not let him die 6 kilometers from help in a crashed pod on a planet he did not intend to crash on. We take him inside and we work. Oliver had already assessed the transport dimensions and the angle of approach required. He is good at logistics in the way that certain people are good at languages, not because they study them but because their mind naturally organizes space and weight and sequence. We got Rokan onto the transport stretcher in 12 minutes, which given his size and the awkward interior of the pod was 12 minutes of careful, focused, wordless work that required all 4 of us in the full extension of the stretcher's weight capacity. He did not stir once during the transfer. The scanner showed the single heart, still cycling, weaker now than it had been when we first read it, as though the movement had cost him something he did not have in reserve. I told Pete to drive as smoothly as he could. He drove as smoothly as the terrain would allow. Nadia sat beside the stretcher and kept her hand on the scanner and relayed the readings to me in a steady, continuous stream, her voice calm and even, the voice that carries information without carrying panic, which is a skill that I believe cannot be taught and that Nadia possesses entirely naturally. The first 12 hours were the worst I have experienced in 4 years on Kepler-9, and that is a statement that covers a considerable range of bad hours. We had no Cathara-specific emergency medical protocols in our system. The Outpost database had xenobiology reference material, theoretical anatomy, physiological baseline data, general species notes, but there is an enormous distance between knowing the theory of how a Cathara cardiovascular system functions and knowing what to do when 3 of its 4 components have stopped functioning, and the 4th is failing by the minute. We cross the distance by moving quickly and being wrong, and correcting ourselves and being wrong again, and correcting ourselves again, which is not the version of medicine that appears in official training materials, but is the version that happens in the real world when the real world does not provide the equipment or the protocols, or the precedents that the training materials assume you will have. Oliver reconfigured the surgical suite in 4 hours. He pulled the xenobiology anatomical data onto a secondary display and compared it against our available equipment and started moving things with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who has a problem and is going to solve it without making noise about the process. The modification he made to the cardiac stimulator, using a frequency adjustment component pulled from our communications array, I would later describe in my medical log as technically inadvisable and functionally essential. He made the modification at 2 in the morning while I was monitoring the scanner readings, and he did not mention it was happening until it was done, which is also the correct approach to technically inadvisable solutions in a crisis. The temperature was the first variable we addressed, because it was the simplest and the most immediate. Cathara core temperature baseline is significantly higher than human baseline, and the pod's crash had dropped his temperature to a level that our instruments flagged as critical, without offering any guidance on what to do about it. We ran every thermal unit in the facility, redirected the environmental controls from the rest of the outpost to priority weight the surgical suite, and put every spare thermal blanket we had, 4 of them, not designed for this purpose but functional, around him in an arrangement that Claire, our kitchen and supply specialist, helped construct because she had been awake since the alarm and had asked Oliver what she could do, and Oliver had told her, and she had done it without ceremony. The second heart restarted at hour 11. I will not pretend I reacted with professional detachment. When the scanner registered the second impulse joining the first, when the pattern shifted from the single fragile beat to the uneven but undeniable presence of 2, I set the scanner down on the table beside me and put both hands flat on the surface and breathed for approximately 15 seconds before I picked it back up. Pete, who was recalibrating the stimulator settings 2 feet away from me, did not look up during those 15 seconds. He understood what was happening. He gave me the space to have it without comment, and then we went back to work. The third heart restarted at hour 23. Nadia cried briefly and quietly in the hallway outside the suite. I know because I heard it and chose not to go out and acknowledge it, because she did not want acknowledgement. She wanted 2 minutes to be a person before she came back in and was a nurse again. And those 2 minutes were entirely deserved and entirely appropriate, and I chose to protect them by staying where I was. The fourth heart remained silent. We worked around that silence for 4 more days. We adjusted every variable we could reach. We checked the stimulator parameters twice each shift. We ran the scanner continuously and analyzed every change in the data for what it might tell us about what the fourth chamber needed that we were not yet providing. We got things wrong. We found out we were wrong and we corrected them. We kept going. Pete did not leave the surgical suite for 14 hours on the first night. I told him twice to go rest. He nodded both times, with the genuine intention of a person who means to follow the instruction. And he stayed exactly where he was, because the intention and the action were not, in that moment, communicating reliably with each other. I stopped telling him after the second time. There are situations in which insisting on rest is the correct medical advice, and situations in which the person in front of you is going to be better served by being allowed to do what they need to do. And this was the second kind of situation. The fourth heart started on day 5. It started at 4:47 in the morning, station time, while Oliver and I were both in the suite doing the same things we had been doing for 4 days, and it started quietly, not with a dramatic surge of activity but with a single tentative impulse that the scanner almost did not catch, and then a second, and then a third, and then it found the rhythm that the other 3 had been keeping without it, and it joined them, and the scanner showed, for the first time, the 4-beat pattern that is a healthy Kethara heartbeat, rolling and layered and strange and more beautiful to me in that moment than anything I could name. Oliver put his hand on my shoulder for exactly 3 seconds. Then he went to update the overnight notes, and I sat in the chair beside the bed and listened to the rhythm for a while, because I had earned the right to do that and I knew it. Day 9 was when he opened his eyes. I was reviewing metabolic readings at the monitoring station beside his bed. It was close to 3 in the morning. The room was quiet. The scanner cycled through its readings in its gentle, unobtrusive rhythm, and I was 3 hours into a night shift that would end when the next person arrived. And I had a cup of cold tea beside me that I kept meaning to drink and kept not drinking, and everything in the room was exactly as it had been for the past several hours. Then I noticed a change in the neurological activity data that I had spent 9 days learning to read, and I looked up, and his eyes were open. Amber. A deep, warm, still amber, the eyes of a species that evolved never to miss anything, and they were looking directly at me with the full, focused, unblinking attention of a Kethara in an uncertain situation. Not aggressive. Not the bright, forward-focused attention of a threat response. Uncertain. Still. The stillness of something that is hurt and is not sure yet whether the world it has woken into is going to hurt it further. I kept my hands flat on the desk, visible, away from the controls. I kept my face as neutral as I could keep it, which is a skill I have practiced for 4 years. Because in xenomedical work the way your face moves tells the patient things before your words do, and the things it tells them matter. I said, in the fragments of Kethara that Nadia and I had been learning from the translation files specifically, for this moment the sentence we had agreed was the most important one. You are not in danger here. His chest rose and fell. Slowly. The scanner held its 4-beat rhythm. He looked at my hands, then at my face, then at the ceiling, tracing the room with the methodical thoroughness of a trained mind, cataloging an unknown environment. He looked at the equipment. He looked at the thermal units. He looked at the star map that Nadia had not yet put up, that came later, and the blank wall where it would eventually hang. He took the room in completely, the way the Kethara take everything in, and then he looked back at me. Why are you still working on me? He said. It was a genuine question. He was not expressing surprise or gratitude or relief. He was asking for information. with the direct, practical candor that would come to be one of the things I appreciated most about him. He had woken up in an alien facility, and he wanted to understand the situation he was in, and the thing he most needed to understand was the motivation of the alien in the chair beside his bed. I thought about my answer. I did not use the time thinking about how it would sound or whether it was strategically wise. I used it the way I use it when a patient asks me a question that matters, to find the most honest and accurate thing I can say. Because you are not dead yet, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. That is not a sufficient reason, he said. For us, I said. It is the only reason we need. He closed his eyes, but before he did, something changed in his face. A shift I could not fully name on day 9, because I did not yet know his face well enough to read its vocabulary. I would learn later that it was the expression the Cathara use when they have received information that does not fit their existing framework and are deciding whether to examine it further or set it aside. He examined it further. He always did. Day 11, Nadia put up the star map. She had spent an afternoon in the archives building it by hand, a rough approximation of the constellations visible from Cathara territory, drawn with the care of someone who does not have the right tools, but has the right intention, and considers the intention sufficient. She taped it to the wall beside his window without making an event of it. He looked at it for a long time. That evening he pointed to one cluster and said a Cathara word that the translator rendered as home light. Nadia smiled at him. His battle crest, which had been cautiously elevated in the guarded position since he first woke, settled flat and smooth against his skull for the first time since the crash. The xenobiology files call that position ease. It was the first time I had seen it on him, and it was the closest thing to a smile that his biology could produce. And in that moment, in a room with a hand-drawn star map and a medical scanner, and a woman who had stayed up an afternoon, making something that would feel familiar to a frightened young person far from home, it was more than enough. Claire spent 7 days on the food. The Cathara nutritional requirements are specific, and our supply inventory was not designed for them. The first 2 attempts he pushed away without ceremony, with an expression that was transparently honest in a way that I found, in spite of everything, quietly amusing. The 3rd attempt he ate completely. Claire wrote the formula down carefully in her notebook with the cracked cover, and made it exactly the same way every day after that. He ran high fevers twice in the 2nd week. During the fevers, someone always sat in the chair. That was not a formal decision or a scheduled rotation. It was the natural result of 11 people who had worked very hard to keep someone alive, deciding independently, and without discussion, that he should not be alone in the dark, when his temperature was high, and his readings were uncertain. The chair was always occupied. The face in the chair changed, but the chair was never empty, and Rokan, in 31 days, never once woke during a fever to find himself alone in a room. I did not know then what that meant in Cathara culture. I would learn later. But I knew what it meant in the culture I come from, which is the culture of people who sit with the ill, and I knew it was the right thing, and that was enough. By day 28, his readings were stable enough that I permitted myself something I had been very carefully not feeling for. 4 weeks, the quiet, disciplined beginning of hope. Not certainty, I do not deal in certainty, but hope honestly held that all of this was going to amount to something. On day 30, sitting beside his bed in the early evening, I told him that we would be sending a signal to his pack, that they would come for him, that he was going home. He was quiet for a long while, looking at the star map. Then he turned and looked at me and said a word in Cathara that the translator worked on for several long seconds before, rendering its result, "Those who hold you when the pack cannot reach you." He said it simply, plainly, without ceremony or performance. He said it, and then he looked back at the star map, and I sat with the weight of it in the quiet room, and I thought that there were some days in this work that cost everything you had, and gave back more than you had known you were owed, and this was one of them. Fleet Mother Kethsora moved the way I imagine tectonic plates move, with a slowness that carries no gentleness but absolute certainty, with a weight that does not announce itself because it does not need to. She came through the main bay entrance with 2 guards at her flanks and stopped just inside the threshold the way a person stops when they are taking the full measure of a space before committing to it. The door at her back, the medical bay extending before her, the clean institutional light illuminating the corridor and the equipment stations and the wall charts and all the ordinary equipment of a medical facility that had spent 31 days being used for something extraordinary. I was waiting at the entrance with Oliver beside me. We were both in clean coats. Neither of us was visibly trembling, which I considered a professional achievement given that she was 9 feet tall and had arrived aboard one of 12 dreadnoughts and was looking at me with the measuring attentiveness of someone who has spent 40 years reading situations and extracting the truth of them quickly and without error. She looked at the bay. She looked at the equipment stations. She looked at the charts on the wall. She looked at Oliver. She looked at me last, and when her eyes settled on mine, she held them there with the unhurried, complete focus of someone who is deciding, in real time, what kind of person they are dealing with. Dr. Okonkwo, she said. Fleet Mother, I said. Thank you for coming in person. I know this morning has not gone the way you expected. It has not, she said. The two words arrived with an economy that told me she had chosen them specifically because they covered exactly what she wanted to say and nothing additional. I would like to walk you through the facility, I said. There are things in this building that will matter for what we discuss, and I think you should see them before we talk. Is that acceptable? She looked at the corridor behind me. She made a gesture with one hand that her guards responded to immediately. A slight change in their spacing relative to each other and to her, a subtle increase in attentiveness without a change in posture. Then she looked at me and said, Walk. I walked. She followed. Her guards maintained their spacing behind her. Oliver followed at a respectful distance, close enough to be present, far enough to give the conversation the space it needed. The first thing I showed her was the modified surgical suite. I opened the door and stood aside so she could see it from the entrance. I said, This is where we worked when Rokan first arrived. We adapted the suite on the first night to accommodate Cathara physiology. Most of the adaptations were developed in real time. The component in the right panel of the cardiac stimulator, the frequency adjustment module, is from our communications array. We needed a part that we did not have, and that was what we had. Fleet Mother stepped into the doorway without entering the room. Her eyes moved across the equipment with slow, thorough precision. Her battle crest held its alert, authoritative elevation, raised and rigid, not the sharp forward flare of threat, but the controlled height of someone paying full attention to everything around them. One of her guards, the one on her left whose name I would later learn was Veth, made a quiet sound just below the threshold of translation, something between a breath and a word. You used your communications equipment, Fleet Mother said. We needed it more for this, I said. Communications can be repaired. It was a straightforward priority. She looked at the stimulator for a moment longer. Then she stepped back into the corridor and we continued. I took her past the supply room. I showed her Claire's notebook. Claire was in the kitchen. I had asked her to stay there during the tour, because I did not want Fleet Mother to feel overwhelmed by the full staff, and Claire had agreed without requiring an explanation. But her notebook was on the supply room shelf where she always kept it when it was not in use, and I took it down and held it open to the relevant pages and showed Fleet Mother the food logs, the formula attempts, the adjustments, the notes Claire had written in her precise small handwriting about what worked and why, and what she thought might work better next time. At the top of the first page, underlined once, what he needs to get better. Fleet Mother looked at the notebook. She reached out and touched the edge of the page with 2 fingers very lightly, as though testing whether the thing she was seeing was real. She withdrew her hand. She said nothing for a moment. Your food specialist, she said. Claire Whitfield, I said. She spent a week developing a diet that would give him what his system needed. He rejected the first 2 attempts fairly honestly. The third one he ate completely, and she made it the same way every day after that. Fleet Mother looked at the page for a moment longer. When she looked up, there was something different in her face from when she had arrived. Not softer, exactly, but less sealed. Less like a surface that is deliberately impermeable, and more like a surface that is deciding thoughtfully what to let through. We moved on. I showed her the thermal unit configuration that we had put together on the first night, the arrangement that had kept his core temperature from dropping into the range the scanner had been flagging as incompatible with continued function. I showed her the communications log on the monitoring station, the 2 outbound signals I had sent on days 3 and 5, the timestamps on both, the absence of any response. I showed her the response status, no reply received. She looked at the timestamps and was quiet for a long moment. Day 3, she said. And day 5, I said. I received no response. I later understood you were in deep space observance. I made the decision to continue rather than wait. She looked at the timestamps again. Something moved behind her eyes that I could not fully read yet. You sent 2 signals and received no answer and you continued. Yes, I said. Waiting would have meant stopping. I did not know how to stop while he was still alive. She said nothing, but the silence she carried as we moved from the monitoring station down the corridor toward recovery was a different kind of silence than the one she had arrived with. The first silence had been the silence of a Fleet Mother exercising disciplined control over a grief she was carrying with enormous precision. This silence was something that was doing active work, turning things over, placing them, examining them from different angles. We stopped in the corridor outside the door to Recovery Room 3. I turned to face her. She stopped. Her guards stopped. The corridor held only the quiet hum of the environmental systems, and the distant sound of the outpost's ordinary life going on in the rooms we had not visited. Before I open this door, I said, I need to say one thing directly. She waited. When the Cathara grant patience, it is the complete kind, no redirected attention, no visible impatience, simply the absolute presence of someone who has decided to hear what you are saying. I cannot explain what my team did in terms that fit a strategic calculation, I said. There was no benefit to us. We have no political relationship with the seventh pack. We had no obligation to expend resources on a patient our equipment was not built to treat. By every framework that governs how facilities like this one are supposed to allocate effort and resources, we should have provided basic comfort care and sent the notification you would have received on day one. I looked at her directly. We did not do that. We did not do it because I cannot look at a young person dying and accept it as a settled outcome when I still have time and hands and something left to try. That is the complete explanation. There is nothing more complicated underneath it. Fleet Mother held my eyes for a long time. The quality of her attention had changed since she arrived. It was no longer the assessing attention of someone cataloging potential threats and responses. It was something more careful and more searching than that. The attention of someone who has encountered a data point that does not fit their model and is deciding whether to update the model. Show me, she said. I opened the door. The room was warm. We had never turned the temperature back down to human standard after his fever broke the second time, partly because there was no medical reason to, and partly because none of us had thought to, and partly, if I am honest, because the warmth had become part of what the room felt like, and it did not seem right to change it. The star map was on the wall. Nadia's hand-drawn constellations, taped with 3 pieces of standard adhesive at each corner. The monitoring station was at the side of the bed, its screen showing the 4-beat cardiac rhythm in its steady rolling pattern. The chair was beside the bed, and in the bed, sitting upright with the pale blue blanket that Nadia had made from spare insulation fabric over his shoulders because she had found a reference to his home star being a blue-white dwarf, and thought the color might feel familiar, was Rokan. He had heard us in the corridor. His battle crest was up. Not the guarded elevation of his early days in this room, but the high, straight, instinctive rise of a young Cathara, recognizing the approach of something known and trusted and missed. His eyes were on the door, and when Fleet Mother stepped into the doorway, they found her immediately. And the sound he made was not small. It was not a sound I will try to describe completely, because my language does not have it. It was somewhere between a cry and a roar, and it carried inside it everything that 31 days of separation had held compressed. Every night in a strange room, and every fever and every moment of uncertainty about whether the pack would come, and it lasted only a few seconds before it was gone. Pulled back into the steady controlled breath of a Cathara who was trained to manage his responses, but the few seconds were enough and they filled the room completely. Fleet Mother Kethora's battle crest rose, not in the controlled authoritative elevation she had worn since she came through my door, not the threat-forward flare or the alert rigid height of command. It rose in the involuntary, unguarded, total way that a pack mother's crest rises when it recognizes the presence of a cub it thought it had lost. It is not a conscious movement. It is the body speaking before the authority of rank can govern it, and it lasted only a moment before Fleet Mother brought it back under control. But it happened, and it was real, and in that moment she was not a Fleet Mother. She was a mother, and the room held that without requiring anyone to say so. Her guards turned in opposite directions, presenting their backs to the doorway, giving her the privacy she had not asked for because she would not ask for it, doing it anyway because they knew her well enough to know what she needed. Oliver touched my elbow lightly and we moved further down the corridor, far enough to be available but not present, leaving the space the room needed for what was happening inside it. The door swung most of the way closed on its hinge. Behind it, a Fleet Mother who had crossed 6 light-years to collect her cub's remains was standing in a room where her cub was alive, and the chair was beside the bed, and the stars were on the wall, and the blanket was the color of home. Oliver stood beside me in the corridor and was quiet for a while. Then he said very quietly, "She thought she was collecting a body." "Yes," I said. "She did not expect this." "No," I said, "nobody expects this. That is usually when it matters most." He looked at the door. He looked back at me. "She is going to have questions." "Many of them," I said. "I will answer all of them. Are you ready?" I thought about 31 days. I thought about a communications component in a cardiac stimulator, and a notebook with a cracked cover and a hand-drawn star map and a chair that was never empty. I thought about the 4-beat rhythm on the scanner finally running clean. "I have been ready for 4 years," I said. I just did not know what the question was going to be. She sat in the patient chair in my office, and it was the wrong size and shape for her, and She sat in it anyway because choosing to fit yourself into a chair built for a smaller body is, when you are a fleet mother of the 7th Pack Sovereign, a deliberate choice, and she made it without comment, and the fact that she made it told me more about who she was than anything she had said since she arrived. Rokan had been returned to his bed. The reunion had taken close to an hour behind the mostly closed door of Recovery Room 3, during which Oliver and I had stood at a respectful distance in the corridor, and Claire had appeared at some point with 2 cups of tea left on the small side table near the office entrance, without being asked and without making a production of it, because providing something warm within reach of people in an intense situation is Claire's fundamental response to almost everything, and it has never once been the wrong response. The guards had stood in the corridor with us, not threateningly, with the settled, grounded quality of people executing a duty they take seriously, and who are at peace with the fact that part of that duty sometimes involves standing in a corridor not doing anything dramatic. The guard on my left, Veth, had looked for a while at the star map visible through the gap in Rokan's door. He had not said anything about it, but he had looked at it for longer than the information required, with the quality of attention you give to something that is telling you something you were not expecting to be told. Fleet Mother began with the questions I had expected. She moved through the medical records with the efficient focus of someone who has spent 40 years reading complex information quickly and identifying what matters. She asked about the initial assessment and the triage decisions. She asked about the cardiac modifications and the protocols consulted. When I told her there was no Cathara-specific emergency protocol available in our system, she stopped and was very still. No protocol. No protocol, I said. We had a xenobiology database with general physiological data, and a medical scanner, and the working principle that attempting something and finding out it is wrong and correcting it is better than doing nothing. We were wrong about several things in the first 48 hours. We corrected them. She looked at the scanner records I had pulled up. 31 days of continuous readings, the jagged, uncertain chaos of the first days gradually smoothing into something recognizable, something stable, something that looked like life taking hold rather than slipping away. She looked at the early readings for a long time. You had no precedent, she said. We had a patient who was still breathing, I said. That was the precedent we worked from. Something moved in her face. It was not an expression I could fully catalog yet, but it was not nothing. She continued through the records, and I answered every question she put to me without abbreviation or softening, because Fleet Mother Kethsora was not a person who would benefit from softened information, and because she deserved the full account. She reached the communications log. She looked at the timestamps on the 2 outbound signals. She looked at the dates on the medical records, the date on the first surgical note, the date on the first food log entry in Claire's notebook, which I had brought with me, because I thought it was relevant evidence of what 31 days actually looked like in practice. She looked at Claire's handwriting, the small, neat, utterly functional documentation of every meal, every formula adjustment, every note about what he had finished and what he had left. 31 days, she said. Yes. 11 people. Yes. Though I want to be accurate about who carried most of it. The people who stayed past their shifts without being asked carried it. Oliver, who was in the surgical suite for consecutive shifts that I lost count of at some point. Pete, who was 26 years old and who decided on the first night that he was not leaving and did not leave. Nadia, who drew the star maps by hand in the data archives on her afternoon off. Claire, who I am fairly confident could feed a small moon if she put her mind to it. Fleet Mother looked at the notebook. She looked at Claire's underlined heading. She touched the edge of the page the same way she had touched it in the supply room, with 2 fingers, lightly, as though verifying the reality of the thing she was seeing. This person is your food specialist, she said. She also, during the second fever, sat in the chair from 2 in the morning until 6 because she could not sleep and she did not want him to be alone. Fleet Mother set the notebook down. She looked at the desk surface for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me about the chair." I had been expecting this, Rokan had told her. She had come to this conversation already knowing what the chair meant in Cathara terms, and she had chosen to ask me about it directly rather than draw her own conclusions, which told me she wanted to understand the intention behind the act, rather than simply its cultural meaning. He was frightened during the fevers, I said. High temperature does things to cognition and to fear response, and being ill in an unfamiliar place surrounded by an unfamiliar species amplifies that. We decided that he should not be alone in the room when his readings were uncertain. Someone sat in the chair, not monitoring from the doorway or running checks on the equipment, sitting in the chair, present, available. That is all it was. In our culture, Fleet Mother said, that act is a pack bond behavior. It is performed for a cub in illness by those who share his bloodline. It is not performed by strangers. It has not, in recorded Kethera history, been performed by a non-Kethera. I know, I said. I read the xenobiology files. She held my eyes. Then you know what you were doing. I know what it means in your culture, I said carefully. I did not perform it as a cultural claim. I performed it because a young person was ill and afraid and I could not think of a reason not to. I have sat in chairs beside patients my entire career. It does not require a reason beyond the fact that they are there and they are afraid. It is what the job is. The silence that followed was the kind that does significant work. Fleet Mother held it for a long time, and I did not fill it, because some silences need to be held by the person they belong to. Rokon used a word for your team, she said at last. She said it in Kethara, and the translator produced its familiar rendering. Those who hold you when the pack cannot reach you. This word is 4,000 years old. In our earliest records it named the pack members who stood in the place of bloodkin when a cub was separated. In hostile territory. It is a designation of complete and unqualified trust. We have never applied it to a non-Kethara. In 4,000 years of recorded use, it has not been extended to anyone who is not of the pack, of the blood, of the Kethara. She looked at me steadily. He applied it to 11 humans on a small outpost 6 light-years from the nearest galactic hub. I did not have a response that felt equal to that. I sat with it for a moment the way you sit with something that weighs more than you expected. When you first picked it up. I am honored, I said. Genuinely and completely honored. I will tell my team, it will mean a great deal to all of them. It should mean a great deal, Fleet Mother said. Because it is not given lightly and it has never been given to your kind before. She stood. The office became smaller when she stood, which was simply a fact about the geometry of the situation. She looked down at me, and the expression she wore was one I had not seen on her yet. Not the authority she had arrived with, not the compressed grief underneath it, not the careful assessing attention of the tour. It was the expression of someone who has organized their entire emotional structure around a loss and has now had that structure removed, and who is standing in the space where it used to be, and finding the dimensions unexpected and strange and, underneath the strangeness, something that is not yet fully nameable but is in the direction of relief. Tell me the names of your team, she said. I told her. Oliver Drum, Nadia Patel, Pete Larson, Claire Whitfield, Elin Morris, who had done double shifts on environmental systems to support the temperature requirements, the others. Each name she received precisely, repeating it once in the way that the Kethara memorize what they intend to carry permanently. They will be known, she said. What your team has done will be entered into Kethara record. These names will be spoken in pack assembly. They will be spoken to the young. They will be spoken when the meaning of those who hold you needs to be taught. I thought about Oliver with 2 cups of coffee at 3 in the morning in front of 12 dreadnoughts. I thought about Pete, not leaving his post for 14 hours because that was what the night required. I thought about Claire's cracked notebook and Nadia's hand-drawn stars. Fleet Mother, I said. I think every one of them would tell you it was just the job. She looked at me for a long time. That, she said, is the most significant thing you have said to me today. And you have said a great many significant things. She moved to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back, deliberately, as she did everything, and looked at me with a steadiness that I have not forgotten since. Humanity has been in the Galactic Assembly's records for 400 years, she said. In Kethara records, you are classified as a transitional species, potentially useful in limited contexts, not of significant note, she paused. That classification is incorrect. I will be correcting it. I hope the correction reflects the right things, I said. The chair beside the bed, she said. The notebook with the cracked cover. The communications component in the cardiac stimulator. The hand-drawn star maps. She held my eyes. Those are the right things. She left. Her guards fell in behind her, and the door closed, and I sat alone in my office, in the quiet of a morning that had started with 12 dreadnoughts and a grief-hardened voice on the comm channel, and I looked at the faded poster on the wall that reads, "The job is never finished, it is only handed forward." I looked at it for a long time. Then I stood up and went to find my team, because there was a great deal to tell them, and most of it was going to make them embarrassed in the particular way that people who do not think of themselves as doing anything special are always embarrassed when they are told they have done something extraordinary. I was looking forward to every second of it. 6 months after the fleet departed Kepler 9, a diplomatic vessel arrived at Earth's orbital station carrying a delegation that the assembly intake system classified as unprecedented in 400 years of recorded interspecies contact. The Kethara had never, in that entire period, sent a delegation to a non-Kethara world under their own initiative. They had received delegations. They had participated in required assembly proceedings. They had never initiated a diplomatic approach to another species on their own terms and their own timetable and with their own agenda. The intake system flagged the classification twice, was overridden twice by increasingly senior intake officers, and eventually produced a new entry category that the Assembly's record-keeping division would spend several weeks arguing about the precise wording of. I watched the arrival broadcast on the small screen in my office on Kepler 9, on the standard 6-second signal delay that is just far enough to feel like the universe is letting you know it is not going to hand you things directly. Had a coffee cooling at the edge of my desk. Oliver was in the doorway in his usual way, present without imposing, available without announcing it. Outside the office window, the pale sky of Kepler 9 was doing the thing it always does in the late morning, which is hold the light in a way that looks slightly too deep to be comfortable, and is, despite that, very beautiful. The delegation came down the arrival corridor of Earth's orbital station in the formal configuration that Kethera use for high significance, diplomatic engagement, travel crest fully settled, limb posture open and forward rather than guarded, the deliberate physical language of a species that has many physical languages and knows exactly which one to use for each situation. 4 members. The lead figure was not Fleet Mother Kethsora. I had half expected her and had prepared myself for the complicated emotional response that would have produced. Instead, it was someone younger, solidly built, with a battle crest that still had the soft edge developing quality at its margins, that I would have recognized anywhere, and that told me, before the camera angle made it fully clear, exactly who I was looking at. Rokan walked without any trace of the damage I had first seen him with. He walked the way Kethara walk when they are fully well and fully present, with the natural, rolling, grounded stride of a body in good health and certain of its place in the space it occupies. He was carrying a formal diplomatic case, the sealed document kind that Kethara use for official pact declarations, and his posture as he carried it had a quality that I recognized immediately because I had watched it develop in a recovery room over 31 days. Settled purpose, the particular quality of a person who has decided what they are for and is moving toward it without apology or performance. Oliver said from the doorway very quietly, "Is that him?" "Yes," I said. "He looks well." "He looks very well," I said. And the thing that happened to my voice when I said it was not something I was going to apologize for. The broadcast cut to the formal address hall. The Galactic Assembly's protocols for a Kethara address of this classification would normally have required 3 days of preparation, format negotiations, seating arrangement approvals, and a preliminary meeting that existed primarily to schedule a subsequent preliminary meeting. The Kethara had communicated in advance that 3 days was acceptable and that Fleet Mother Kethsora would be transmitting a supplementary statement simultaneously via relay. The Assembly had agreed to all terms without its customary procedural resistance, which is itself a testament to how the Kethara are regarded in galactic governance, and how much the Assembly did not want to be on the wrong side of whatever this was. Fleet Mother Kethsora's relay transmission came through with the precise timing of everything she did. Her image on the broadcast screen was clear and steady, her battle crest in the full elevated position of formal address, her voice carrying its weight across 6 light-years with no apparent diminishment. She spoke in galactic standard. She spoke without notes. She spoke as someone who has had a long time to decide exactly what she wants to say, and has decided to say it without softening or strategic framing, which is the most effective form of speech in any language, and also the most demanding. She told the Assembly that the Kethera had maintained a species classification system for 400 years, that the system was built on a specific question. What is this species capable of achieving in terms of power, reach, and influence? She told them that this question had never fully failed them before. She told them it had failed completely when applied to humanity. She told them about Kepler 9, not in the abbreviated, neutralized language of an official report, in the direct, unadorned language of a fleet mother addressing a body of record on a matter of complete significance. She told them about an escape pod in the eastern lowlands and 3 silent hearts and a medical team that had no protocol and no precedent and no strategic reason for what they did. She told them about a communications component in a cardiac stimulator and a notebook with a cracked cover and stars drawn by hand on paper and a chair beside a bed that was never empty. She told the Assembly that her classification system had asked the wrong question about humanity for 400 years, that every framework the galactic community had applied to assessing humanity had been organized around the wrong central inquiry. She said this plainly, with the directness of someone who has no interest in making the error easier to acknowledge, and no interest in making the correction smaller than it is. The right question, she said, is not what can this species destroy and not what can this species build, and not what territory can this species claim, or what forces can this species field. The right question. The question that every civilization in this assembly has failed to ask about humanity since humans first took their seat in this chamber is this: what will this species refuse to let die? I sat in my office 6 light years away and felt my eyes do what they do when something arrives that is larger than I had room prepared for. I have mentioned that I cried. I want to be clear that it was not a dramatic or extended response. It was approximately 30 seconds during which my face made choices I was not consulted about, after which I was composed again. Oliver, in the doorway, said nothing about it. He is a good colleague and a decent person, and he understood. Fleet Mother continued. She told the assembly that humanity was not a transitional species, not a Category 2 civilization waiting to develop into something of note. She said that humanity was, in the oldest Kethera designation available for the concept, those who hold you when the pack cannot reach you. She said it had been true of humanity for a long time, and that the galaxy had failed to notice it because the galaxy had been asking the wrong question. The formal address lasted 47 minutes. The assembly record, which I read later in full detail, noted that it produced no questions from the floor during the designated question period, which is unprecedented in assembly proceedings, and was not the result of indifference, but of a collective pause of the kind that settles over a large room when something has been said that requires more than the usual response time. The message from Rokon arrived the following morning on my personal comm unit. He had written it in Galactic Standard with fragments of Kethara, threaded through the parts where Standard did not have the exact words he needed. I could read those fragments well enough now to receive them without the translator, which I chose to do because he had written them that way on purpose. He told me he was representing the 7th Pack in a formal initiative to establish xenomedical exchange between human medical institutions and Kethara healing practitioners. He told me this was a role that had been created specifically for this work, that it did not exist 6 months ago and existed now, because he had proposed it, and Fleet Mother had formalized it, and the 7th Pack had ratified it after a discussion that he described as lively and long and ultimately decisive. He told me his pack found his choice of focus baffling. He told me he did not mind. He told me that he had spent 31 days watching 11 people choose to stay when every reasonable calculation said to leave, and that he had decided that the ability to choose to stay, to choose to tend, to choose to sit in the chair, to choose to keep working when the outcome was uncertain, was worth more than any other quality he had been trained to value, and that he intended to spend his life learning how to teach it. He ended the message with the old Kethara word, not in translation brackets, written plain, in the original, the way you write something when you want it received without distance. Oliver read it over my shoulder. He is not a person who cries easily. He did not cry now, but he was quiet for a full minute after he finished it, and then he said, "He is going to be extraordinary." "He already is," I said. The months that followed shifted things in the galaxy in ways I will not try to fully catalog, because the full catalog would be long, and most of the important parts were not official. The Galactic Assembly's classification for humanity was formally revised. The new entry is not a category number. It is a phrase, rendered in all 32 official languages of the Assembly, which translates across the majority of them to something in the vicinity of those who tend. The debate about the exact wording took 11 months and produced a document that I understand to be fascinating and that I have not read in its entirety because I don't have the patience for assembly procedural language, even when the subject is flattering. 17 alien medical academies requested copies of our Kepler-9 records within the first year following the broadcast. Not the official medical records, those were already available in the Galactic Xenobiology database. They requested our operational logs, our supply records, Claire's food notebooks, Oliver's overnight notes, the shift schedules that showed who had worked extra hours and for how long, the materials that documented not what we had done medically but how we had done it, the texture of it, the ordinary daily substance of choosing to stay and keep working when the right outcome was not guaranteed. 12 of those academies put Fleet Mother's question above their entrance doors. The phrasing varies by language, but the question is always the same. What will this species refuse to let die? Claire framed her notebook, the one with the cracked cover and the small neat handwriting and the underlined heading. She framed it and hung it in the outpost kitchen, and when people visited and asked what it was, she told them it was documentation, and that documentation was how you did something right a second time when it needed to be done again. People took photographs of it. I do not know exactly when this happened, but at some point it became something that visitors to Kepler-9 asked to see specifically, and Claire always showed it to them with the direct unsentimental pleasure of someone who is proud of good work without making more of the pride than it deserves. Nadia started a correspondence with a Cathara healer in training named Kes, who had found the translated records of Rokan's recovery, and had written to our outpost with a list of questions so specific and so well considered that Nadia had responded immediately, and they had not stopped corresponding since. Kes is, by Nadia's report, brilliant and occasionally insufferable, and asks questions that Nadia cannot always answer, and that she finds enormously motivating as a result. Pete applied for an advanced xenomedical certification program that opened as a direct result of the exchange initiative. He was one of 412 applicants for 12 available positions. He was accepted. He did not tell me until after he received the confirmation, which is Pete entirely and completely. And when I congratulated him, he turned slightly red and said he was not sure he deserved it. I told him that the deserving was not in question, and that the only question remaining was whether he was going to go. And he said yes. And I said good, and that was that. Oliver stayed. He has never once suggested leaving, and when I have asked him why, not because I want him to leave, purely out of curiosity, he tells me that the work here is interesting, and that the coffee is not as bad as the reputation suggests, and that he finds Kepler-9's slightly too deep blue sky restful in a way he cannot fully explain. I accept all three of these reasons without examination. I stayed. I had known I was going to stay before Fleet Mother's fleet was even out of scanner range. Kepler-9 is not the posting you choose when you want career advancement, or professional recognition, or the comfort of working within established protocols with adequate equipment and appropriate resources. It is the posting you choose when you want the work that is hard and the problems that do not have ready solutions and the days that cost more than they give you back, until suddenly they give you back everything all at once. And you remember why you are here. 3 weeks after the diplomatic broadcast, the Eastern Sensor Array registered a new signal. Not an escape pod this time. Something larger, multiple life signs. Configuration unknown. The alert came through at 8 in the morning while I was reviewing supply inventory and thinking about nothing in particular, and it produced in me exactly the response I have come to expect from significant mornings. A sharp focus, a putting down of whatever is in my hands, a reaching for my coat. Oliver appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He looked at my screen. He looked at me. He handed me the coffee. We did not say anything for a moment. We did not need to. Unknown configuration, I said. Multiple life signs, he said. Eastern lowlands, yes. I drank the coffee. I put on my coat. I went to the bay. Outside, Kepler-9's sky was holding its light in that way it has, slightly too deep and entirely itself, and the pale ground stretched toward the eastern rock formations where whatever was out there was waiting, and the work was what it always was, uncertain and necessary and mine. And I walked toward it the same way I have always walked toward it and the same way I always will, not because I know what is waiting, not because I have the right equipment or the right protocol or the right precedent, because that is what I do, because that is what we do. Somewhere in the eastern lowlands there were living things that needed help, and I had hands and time and the absolute unqualified, ordinary, everyday human refusal to look at something that is still breathing and call it finished. Not yet, not while the work remains. Not while there is a chair to sit in and a scanner to read, and a team of people who will show up without being asked and stay without being told, and who will improvise solutions to problems the training materials never anticipated, because the training materials could not anticipate people, and people are always the variable that the calculations fail to account for. That is what we are. It is not complicated, and it is not dramatic, and it is not the answer that sounds impressive in a classification system, or a species assessment, or a strategic analysis of galactic power. It is much simpler than all of that. We are the species that stays. We are the species that sits in the chair. We are the species that draws the stars by hand, and writes in the cracked notebook and pulls the communications component from its housing at 2 in the morning because the patient needs it more than the communications array does. We are the species that, when the universe looks at something and calls it done, looks back at the universe and says, not yet, not while I am here, not on my watch, not today. I walked through the bay doors into the morning, and the work was waiting, and I went to meet it.